You're standing in a bank lobby, signing the last page of a loan payoff form, and nobody in the building knows this is the first time in your family's history that anyone has done this. Quick note, not financial advice, just what this specific moment actually feels like, and how much of it is real versus how much is just quiet math you never noticed compounding until now. You were maybe 7 the first time you understood that money was a source of tension in your house, not because anyone explained it to you, but because you learned to read a certain silence at the kitchen table when a bill arrived. A survey a few years back found that nearly half of adults say their parents' habits directly shaped their own relationship with money. Not the good habits necessarily, just whichever ones were actually modeled in front of them. You didn't choose that inheritance. You just absorbed it, the way kids absorb an accent. You remember specific pieces of it without ever being told to remember them. A phone unplugged from the wall during dinner because a collections call had already come through twice that week. A birthday that got quietly rescheduled to sometime this month, instead of the actual day. None of it was explained to you as being about money, exactly. Kids aren't usually told the real reason directly. They just learn to notice the pattern of tension arriving on a schedule that seemed to follow the mail. By your early 20s, the pattern had a shape you could actually name, even if you couldn't yet do anything about it. A car repair became a payment plan. The payment plan became a reason to put groceries on a card that month. Nobody in your family sat you down and taught you this was how it worked. It was just the water you'd been swimming in since you were old enough to notice the tension had a cause. Roughly half of people carrying real debt say they specifically worry about how it will land on their kids one day. Your parents almost certainly felt that exact worry, quietly, even while the pattern kept repeating anyway. You remember one specific version of it clearly, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework while a parent sat across from you doing math on the back of an envelope. The kind of math that involves moving one number to cover another number, over and over, in an order that never quite adds up to 0. Nobody explained the envelope to you, you just understood. The way kids understand things without being told that the envelope meant the night was going to feel a little tighter than usual. There's a specific afternoon that ends up mattering more than it seemed to at the time. Maybe it's a call from a family member asking to borrow money you don't actually have to spare, framed the way it always gets framed. A short-term thing, paid back soon, no big deal. Every other time saying yes was the whole family script. This time, for reasons you can't fully explain even to yourself, you say you can't. It's an uncomfortable, almost nauseating 30 seconds on the phone. Nothing dramatic happens afterward. The world doesn't end. That's sort of the whole point. The moment that breaks a pattern rarely looks like a moment at all from the outside. There's a version of you from just a couple years earlier who would have said yes before the sentence asking for the money was even finished, and then quietly figured out later how to actually cover it. Saying no this one time doesn't feel like strength in the moment. It feels closer to guilt. The specific kind that shows up when you're doing something correct that still goes against everything the people around you would have done in your position. You start doing something that would have sounded almost boringly small to describe out loud. Checking an account balance before making a purchase, instead of after. Building a buffer that exists purely so a car repair stays a car repair instead of automatically becoming a payment plan. None of this requires a 6-figure salary or a lucky break. A large national study of people who eventually built real wealth found that the overwhelming majority never received any meaningful inheritance at all. The habit mattered more than the head start. That's a strange, quietly hopeful thing to sit with when you grew up assuming the head start was the whole game. The buffer starts embarrassingly small, a few $100s, built one smaller than usual grocery trip at a time, sitting untouched in an account you have to actively resist raiding the first few times an unexpected bill shows up. It doesn't feel like progress at that size. It feels like barely anything, sitting there doing nothing, while the old instinct keeps insisting there's always something more urgent it could be used for instead. The only thing that makes it real is refusing to touch it long enough for it to actually become real. The hardest part isn't the math. The math, once you actually sit down and do it, turns out to be almost mechanical. Pay this down first, redirect that payment here, let this account sit untouched for a while. The hard part is that every one of those decisions gets made against a background hum of family history, telling you this isn't really how things go for people like you. There's no line item for that in a budget. It just shows up as a strange kind of resistance every time you're about to do the boring, correct thing instead of the familiar thing. A friend suggests splitting a spontaneous trip, and the automatic yes is already halfway out of your mouth before the actual math catches up to it. Turning it down feels for a second like turning down a piece of who you've always been in every friend group. the one who figures it out somehow, who never wants to be the reason a plan doesn't happen. The new version of that answer is quieter and a lot less fun to say out loud. It's also the version that doesn't need figuring out later, because there was never a gap to cover in the first place. Somewhere in your late 20s or early 30s, a moment arrives that has nothing dramatic about it on the surface. You check an account, and the number is simply positive, not in a way that requires an asterisk or a payment due next week. You sit with that for a second, waiting for the catch, because a debt-free number has never shown up in your adult life without one attached. There isn't a catch this time. It's just the number sitting there, quietly being true. You mention it to your parents almost carefully, the way you'd bring up something you're not sure how to categorize yet. Their reaction isn't what you expected. Not defensiveness, not comparison, just a kind of tired relief that's been waiting a long time to surface. It turns out the worry about the cycle continuing wasn't only yours. It was theirs too, the entire time, running quietly underneath every conversation about money your family ever had. There's a long pause on the phone after you tell them, longer than the news itself would seem to justify. When they finally say something, it isn't advice and it isn't a comparison to how things were for them at your age. It's closer to an apology that was never quite going to get said out loud any other way. For the tight birthdays, for the unplugged phone, for a version of childhood they'd have changed if they'd known how. You didn't ask for that apology. It shows up anyway, folded into a sentence about how proud they are, because apparently that's where it had been living the whole time. If there's a kid in your life now, watching you the way you once watched your own parents, they're absorbing something different than what you absorbed. Not because you're giving a lecture about money, you probably aren't, but because the tension that used to arrive with the mail simply doesn't show up anymore. They don't know that's remarkable. To them, it's just normal, the water they're swimming in without noticing it, the same way you noticed yours. That might be the actual inheritance that ends up mattering most, not an amount, just an absence of the thing that used to be there. None of this makes you special in some singular way, and it's worth being honest about that. Plenty of people carry family debt patterns their whole lives and never get a clean moment like this one. Sometimes because of circumstances entirely outside their control, not a lack of trying. What changed for you wasn't superior willpower. It was a handful of specific, repeatable decisions, made consistently enough for long enough that they eventually outweighed the pattern they were competing against. Here's the part that's easy to miss from inside the story. Breaking a cycle like this one doesn't erase where you came from, and it isn't supposed to. You'll probably still flinch a little when a bill arrives, even years into being fine. Old patterns leave a kind of residue that doesn't fully wash out just because the numbers changed. The difference now is that the flinch is a memory, not a forecast. It tells you something about your past. It no longer gets to tell you something true about your future. You'll still catch yourself every so often doing the mental math before you've even consciously decided to worry, checking a balance twice in one day for no real reason, bracing slightly before opening an email from a bank. It passes faster than it used to, and it passes completely now, instead of settling in for the rest of the week the way it always did growing up. That's not nothing. That's most of the actual difference, quietly proving itself out one ordinary Tuesday at a time. If you're the one in your family who's actually managed to do this, you probably already know nobody's throwing you a parade for it. And that's fine. It was never really about the parade. It was about one account balance once being simply and quietly positive, with nothing else attached to it. That's the whole story. It just took a while to get there. If this is the kind of thing you think about, stick around. That's basically what this channel is. And before you go, are you the one who broke the pattern in your family, or are you still working on it? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone.